Welcome to Patty's Place, a place where we will talk about grief, dementia, and caregiving. I named this in honor of my mom, Patty. Uh, I'm your host, Lisa, so we will talk about all of these things as well. And hopefully you won't feel so alone today. So grab your cup of tea, your cup of coffee, or a glass of wine if you're having a really bad day. And today I'm very excited. We're going to talk with Amy Shaw. She is the founder of betterdementia.com, and she's a dementia clinician, educator, and author of several books, I believe. Is that correct, Amy?
One that has been published to date and one that will be publishing next year.
Okay, so we're going to talk about, I'm very excited to talk about this. So, why do you think understanding dementia changes everything for families?
It is the foundation on which families really navigate a very confusing journey.
Yes.
Dementia is one of the most complicated journeys of aging, and families are often navigating this journey without a map.
That's very
And
true.
if you don't know where you are and what is happening next, it all just feels very chaotic and scary.
It really does. It really does from experience, because there is a lot of information out there, but yet you don't always know where to find it. So what would you say? What do families wish they had known earlier about the dementia journey?
Many of the families that I work with, after I've provided them my educational framework, tell me, and also I teach strategies that align with where a loved one is in their journey. They say to me, Amy, I wish I had met you years ago, because they have been navigating this, again, this very complicated, emotionally heavy journey, often in a way that many caregivers do. They treat their loved one as though they haven't changed.
Yes.
And until they understand what is changing in their loved one's brain, kind of like if you knew that somebody had a broken arm, you would not ask them to carry the groceries in, right?
Right. Right.
And essentially, dementia is breaking different regions of the brain. And when caregivers understand that, they can work backward from behavior to brain and understand where they are in their journey. And then they can align with that. And it doesn't make the disease change, but it makes the caregiving journey change for the better.
I would agree with that 100%. I know with my mom, well, my mom didn't get diagnosed till she was already moderate to severe. She refused to. I tried to get her to go to the doctor, but she just refused to do it. Now looking back, because then I did research on at the Alzheimer's Association website and things like that, realizing that was part of her dementia journey. She wasn't in denial. That was just that part of the brain. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because once I began to understand that, for lack of a better term, that her brain was dying, different parts of her brain were shutting off, I could understand it better. Can you talk about that a little bit to help people understand? Because you can't see it. It's not like, when you have a terminal illness, people understand cancer, or they understand those types of diseases, but dementia, they don't get it. So, yeah.
No, dementia is unique in that way. I have helped people who are getting to the end of their life with all of the diseases that you've mentioned. And the reason that I got involved in helping families with dementia was this very issue. Dementia is unique. It does not show itself. In fact, I often say people with dementia do not go around waving their memory and cognitive incompetence flag, right?
Right.
There's actually reasons. The structure of the brain, its architecture, does not have a sort of a safety valve in there that says, hey, I'm failing. And so people who are experiencing cognitive losses in different regions of their brain, there's really no feedback to provide them with that insight. And so what caregivers see is very different from what the patient with dementia or the person with dementia experiences. They literally cannot remember sometimes that certain things have happened, like car accidents or getting lost in a grocery store, right? And if it didn't happen to you, then how could you be informed by an experience that did not happen, right?
Right.
And once caregivers understand that person's experience of their life is so vastly different, or can be so different than our experience. They can move from compassion, just in the same way that when we see that somebody has a broken leg or a broken arm, we are compassionate toward them, right? We don't ask them to carry the groceries in. So what I teach caregivers is all rooted in brain anatomy. I studied a field called psychobiology,
Okay.
which is how the architecture of our brain results in our behavior.
Okay.
Studied child development, language acquisition, primate behavior, and humans are a primate,
Yes.
and
Yes.
how we organize, right, into
Right.
society and families and relationships and all of that. And it really has come in handy because dementia is all of that brain development in the unraveling of it. And so when I work with families, I help them understand the different regions of brain and the different cognitive or physical or emotional or memory functions those regions are responsible for, and how failures in those regions show up in our daily lives. And very importantly, how different regions of cognition and brain function underpin our daily living tasks.
Okay.
And then we can identify from the failures that we are seeing in our loved one, oh, we are here in this journey. Dementia often feels very unpredictable,
It
but
does.
it is not. There are patterns to dementia.
Mm-hmm.
And when we think about the different regions of brain and how they fail, it's actually rather, I don't want to say easy, but it's not as complicated, I think, as a lot of these staging systems that talk about mild, moderate, and severe.
Yeah.
That language is very vague
It
for families.
it really is, because trying to understand like where my mom was. Well, by the time my mom got diagnosed, they said she was in moderate to severe, which I could believe that because I had noticed years before different things that were happening with her. And at that point, she didn't know who my dad or I were. That's when I was like, okay, we have to do something here, Um,
Yeah.
but when you were talking about that, when my mom, towards the end, when we had hospice come in, the hospice nurse explained it like, different sparks of the brain would shut down. And she felt my mom was highly unusual because my mom was very mobile given the stage of her dementia. And I witnessed it that day. My mom was in the bathroom. She was standing at the counter, like at the sink. And all of a sudden, the brain shut off and she couldn't make those turns anymore. She couldn't figure out how to, and the nurse was there luckily that day. And she's like, we're going to have to get the wheelchair. We're going to have to do that, that part has finally, and it is true, a couple things. One, it always makes me so angry when people are dealing with dementia patients and they think they're doing it on purpose.
Sure. Yeah.
It does, because I'm always like, they're not doing this on purpose,
Yeah.
And I don't know how to break that for people to help. I think part of it is from the caregivers, because it's so hard to let go of that person you knew.
It is. It is. And one of the things that I help families understand is that when you're not moving from a place of accurate understanding of what is happening on the dementia journey, we humans are sense makers. We always want to live in the why, right?
Yes.
And in the absence of understanding, we still explain things. And so just like you said, I work with lots of families who I listen for this misunderstanding and this mistranslation, and it comes out in language just like you said. My person is lying to me. They're manipulating me. I don't know why, X, Y, or Z. And when I help provide that education piece, right, to help them understand what the brain is responsible for and how it shows up when it fails, they can then move from, oh, that actually isn't their fault. They are still functioning with a brain that is still doing its job for that person, but without some of the structures in place anymore that they had years ago. One of the things that's really seductive, I guess, about the dementia journey is that your person still looks like the person you've always known.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
When we interact with children who are growing up, we have a visual cue of their cognitive sophistication and their cognitive abilities. And on the dementia journey, we don't have a convenient guide, a visual guide like that. And so families, caregivers really often treat their loved one as though they are the same mother or father or spouse that they have known their entire lives or have been married to for 60 something years. And that's why this journey is so counterintuitive. Right? And until we understand what is breaking and when, so that we can align with those failures, it's really very counterintuitive for families. Families often have to learn the hard way through a lot of trial and error. They often become the bad guy in the relationship because they do have to step in and navigate and manage certain aspects of daily living to keep their loved one safe. But they're doing it in a way that they've always interfaced with this person, and that doesn't work anymore on the dementia journey.
No, it doesn't. It took my dad quite a while to understand, and he finally ended up saying he was trying to be logical to an illogical problem. And I'm like, yeah, you have to, once I understood, I was like, you have to enter her world, like my mom, I tell the story that my mom always thought my dad was stealing her money. He wasn't, and I know that's very common in dementia. And my dad even like wrote out this whole like piece of paper for her to explain it, and I would explain it to her, and she still wouldn't believe it. And what worked was I would tell her, "Don't worry about your money. I live across the street from the bank. Me and Annie, her dog, we could go get your money at any time," and that made her feel better.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes it's the simplest things, for people, and it is hard because, I would look and it was my mom, but it wasn't,
Right. Yeah.
And it's so hard to understand that. So how do you, like, caring for a loved one, how do you balance that, managing the work-life relationship? Because it's difficult. It really is.
It really is. The caregiving journey, which becomes a caregiving journey much earlier than most people expect, and that I think the medical community really even acknowledges. I want to go back for a second to something you said. We were talking about the mild, moderate, severe, and that your mother's diagnosis came when she was already in the moderate to severe. I suspect, like many of my families that I work with, and even my own family, my mother also has a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. And she was diagnosed at the mild cognitive impairment stage. And yet within several months, she started having significant failures in finances and medications that had she been living alone, she could have done some real harm to herself.
Oh,
and
for sure.
Fortunately, my dad was there, right? And I am her primary provider, basically. And our family is fortunate that I know exactly how to translate the failures into, okay, what do we do next? And many families experience mild cognitive impairment or even mild dementia as not very mild, right? When families have to step in and navigate their loved one already. And I know myself, I have spent many hours worrying about my mom and worrying about my dad. And I have the framework to understand. If I didn't have an understanding of where she was and what was happening, I can imagine my strain and stress and worry would be exponential. And so the mild and mild cognitive impairment stages can actually be very challenging for families. It doesn't feel mild to them. I'm interested to know what you thought about when your mom was earlier in her journey.
Well, I had noticed it probably a good 5 to 7 years before she was actually diagnosed. Just little things, like she would ask the same question over and over again. And I didn't handle it well at first, because I was like, I'd be like, you just asked me that, or my mom and I would watch TV, and my mom was one of those people, like, she loved mysteries and stuff, and she could usually solve
Mhm.
it before the end of it. And she couldn't follow like something as simple as a Hallmark movie. And I was like, okay,
Sure.
and she was a big reader, and she wasn't reading anymore, and she just stopped driving. I think that she probably got lost. Not that she drove a lot. I think she probably
Right.
scared herself. So
Mhm.
instead of saying that, my dad had bought a new car, and she blamed my dad. She just told him,
Oh,
you bought
sure.
this new car, it's too big, I'm never driving it. you know um
Right. Yeah.
so on one hand, I wasn't surprised when they
Sure.
finally, but yeah, I knew something wasn't right. And when I came to understand, because you want to put this framework in, like you understand different diseases, like, oh, stage 1, stage 2, but really, like you were just saying, with dementia, they really go through all of them. And it's really hard to
Mhm.
put them in stages, because one week they could be like, oh, they're okay, and
Yeah.
then the next week you're like, wait a minute, they're hallucinating now.
Right.
And I think it's false to just believe, oh, well, they go from mild to moderate to severe, because it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, that's why my system, I've really never utilized the mild, moderate, and severe
Mm-hmm.
because I don't really even know how to translate that for a family. And my work is primarily to help families navigate this journey. And many families in the mild stage do not experience a mild journey
Mm-hmm.
because if their loved one has a type of dementia that comes with, like you said, hallucinations, if they are paranoid,
Mm-hmm.
if they have agitation, physical or verbal, and the family doesn't know how to interact with the loved one to maintain their well-being, their dignity, their sense of competence, capability, and control, then their journey is not mild, even if their loved one's failures are only in one or two domains of cognitive functioning, right?
And my mom got
And
very agitated. Like,
gosh,
I had to go physically get her, because at times I thought, oh my God, like she just like hated my dad, like hated him with a
sure.
passion. Like she thought he was having affairs, and he wasn't.
Yeah,
But I was like, I got to
sure.
separate you two, because I'm scared of what she might do, you know?
Yeah, those are really challenging expressions of dementia. And often caregivers don't have a way of understanding that psychiatric symptoms, which
Mm
can happen at any stage of dementia, can range from mild to crisis level.
hmm. Mm
They don't have an understanding of how to interpret these behaviors and how to understand them as, uh, just like if your heart fails, we expect certain symptoms,
hmm. Right.
shortness of breath, chest pain. When your brain fails, we expect certain symptoms,
Mm
and
hmm.
they can be insomnia or agitation or hallucinations. And without that understanding, often families who have experience with a different loved one or relative on the dementia journey, that informs their expectations of this journey. And so they come into this new experience with a new loved one, and they're terrified that that same thing is going to happen,
Mm
right,
hmm.
with their loved one. And there's so much variation here. But dementia is very predictable. There are cognitive domains that tend to fail in a predictable order.
Okay.
And when caregivers are supported with that scaffolding, it's like having a map.
Mm
Now
hmm.
you're oriented to where you are, you're oriented to the destination. And many families that I've worked with have said over the years, Amy, everything happened just like you said it was going to, X, Y, and then Z. And we were prepared because we knew from the start how this journey would progress. And that's really transformative, because something as scary as dementia, um, that can be different for every person, is really overwhelming if you don't have a map.
It is very overwhelming, because you're feeling, okay, you know that your family member is sick,
Yeah.
even if, like, for my mom, if you looked at her, you would
Hmm.
not know anything was wrong with her.
Right.
you know so
Hmm.
you're coping with that, that they're sick, but then you're also coping with that loss, that anticipatory grief of,
Absolutely.
she's not my mom yet, she
Mhm.
is. And then you also, like, I had to deal with my dad too, because he didn't know how to cope with it either.
Yeah.
He didn't want it to be true either. It took him a while to get to that point with it.
Yeah.
And then you just feel so overwhelmed because you think, oh my God, Alzheimer's, dementia, what does this mean
Right.
with it? And I think as a caregiver, you feel guilt, you feel conflict, you do get burnt out, you know,
Absolutely.
because I
Yeah.
know sometimes, well, my mom ended up going to a memory care facility, uh,
Okay.
because the doctors and nurses were like, they told us we weren't going to be able to care for my mom at home with it. And I do think for my mom, even though I hated that, it was like,
I
it was
bet.
horrible that I had to do that for her. But I know it was the right decision, because she actually
Sure.
she got out of my house twice in one night.
Okay.
And she was
Yeah.
like, I was literally right next to her and she ran out the door. Um,
Yeah.
I think if we had brought people in, I think it would have agitated her more if we kept her at home.
Sure.
Because again, she thought my dad was having affairs and he wasn't, uh,
Yeah.
with it. But you feel this guilt that,
Absolutely.
so can you talk a little bit about that with the caregivers?
Definitely. Caregivers, I talk about this heavy caregiver backpack. I run
Mm-hmm.
a support group in my town and have many caregivers who come month after month, and I listen for their pain points, for their points of suffering, right? And there are several common themes to almost every dementia journey from the caregiver's perspective. They do feel guilt, they feel sorrow, they feel loss, they feel frustration, sometimes they feel resentment, they feel anticipatory grief. They also feel a very complicated emotion of anticipatory relief.
Mm-hmm.
And many caregivers are reluctant to share this, but I want to normalize this for people, that if you feel the anticipatory relief that when your loved one passes, your life will be a little bit easier, I always normalize that for caregivers, because the caregiving journey on the dementia journey is very, very heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of what I work with families. One of the things that is common and that I hear in your story is that your dad was working from a different understanding from you.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it very challenging. And
Yes.
when I work with families, I invite everyone that interfaces with that loved one with dementia. And we meet, I work with families all across the country. We meet online so that we can all have a shared framework and understanding and experience. And moving in unison in this way from a shared understanding really helps the entire caregiving family journey. And this is a real shift from when I worked in the traditional medical model, which pairs the patient and the clinician primarily in the care, right? We center the patient in our traditional medical model. I realized very quickly I developed the first comprehensive dementia care program for patients in Wyoming. And I was meeting the patient and the family at home and talking about all the patient's failures with the patient sitting right there, and trying to educate the caregiver with the patient sitting right there. It was deeply impactful to the patient's dignity and well-being.
Yes.
And very quickly, I decided this is not the appropriate approach for the dementia journey. We have to separate the patient and the caregiving support. And so that's what I do in my practice when I work with families. I meet with the patient if they are in Wyoming separately from the family visits.
I,
And
I,
that really makes all the difference for the families.
I would agree with that, because they don't understand what is going on, and sometimes they do get agitated, like, no, that's not true, I'm not doing, I'm fine, or
Yeah,
that. And I
yeah,
think, like, what you just touched upon is how important it is to give them dignity, you know
absolutely. Yeah,
to be able to go into the world and give them dignity, because sometimes I think now back of, like, God, that had to be so scary for my mom.
sure.
Like, that she didn't understand what was going on, things that she thought she
Yeah,
could do, she couldn't do anymore. Something as simple as confusing the TV remote control for the phone.
sure.
Like, it has to be so scary. And so to give her, give them dignity with it. And I feel like it's so many different layers because you're trying to understand
Mhm.
the patient, but then you have all these levels as a caregiver,
Yeah.
and how do you, I know one of the questions I wanted to, why do you think that caregivers feel so unprepared for this journey, even when they're very highly capable people?
Yeah. What a great question. Dementia is not intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
It unravels things in the brain that are not visible. And until you have a way of translating behavior back to brain function,
Mm-hmm.
you simply don't know what is happening and where your loved one is. On top of that, there are many different aspects of brain cognition and function that make memory and processing unreliable and unpredictable. And so that's another layer of complexity that I help make sense of. And then we have our human brain is so amazing. I mean, actually, I see this in my dog's ability too. She can read the room. She knows when I'm
Yes.
upset or when I'm
Yes.
happy, right? And we humans have we developed this from a young age, from infancy on, this incredible set of communication skills, receptive and expressive communication skills that allow us to read the room and succeed in the social environment. Okay. And this is a very complicating layer of the dementia journey because people with dementia often sound and seem and look like they are still just fine,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
And that's because we are built with this, we develop these amazing social skills to allow us to succeed in the social realm. And so the social ability, when you talk to your friend on the phone and you're just catching up and you haven't seen them in several weeks, you don't really know if they're telling you the truth. And you don't really hold a friend on the phone to account in the same way that you might with a person who's right in front of you who is telling you something that you think and know to be untrue, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So phone conversations with friends are a way that caregivers can adapt their understanding to their communications and interactions with their loved one. If you think about how you interface with a friend, you know better than when a friend calls and says, I'm getting divorced. You don't start listing the 1,001 reasons you didn't like their spouse, right?
Right.
You are
Right.
there to support them in a way that maintains their dignity and well being and their perception of your respect for them. And so I help with that. And that is the most fundamental and important transformation that caregivers need to make to be able to navigate this journey in a way that doesn't take so much out of them. Because it's really hard to go through life supporting and loving someone that you think is lying to you all the time.
Yes. That.
That's an impossibility. That's a task that's too hard for a caregiver, and that causes the caregiver to suffer.
Uh,
That's not a comfortable place to be.
no, and I've seen that with other friends and things like that, and
Yeah.
I I would try, but I'd be like, okay, they're just not there. And that's okay. I would respect that, but I'd be like, if you just try to enter their world and try to understand, they're not doing anything on purpose. It helped, because sometimes
Right.
I would be able to, like, I'd go see I saw my mom every day and I'd go and I'd talk to her. And sometimes I would laugh and I'd be like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. I mean, I would joke, and sometimes I'd be like, sometimes listening to two dementia patients talk to each other
Yeah.
was highly amusing. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but I was like,
No.
okay.
Yeah.
Like my mom believed that where she was at in memory care, she thought she was at her grandma's house. And so
Perfect.
I was like, okay. And she'd be like,
Great.
and I was always so grateful that I paid attention to all her family stories. So I could just
Yeah.
jump right in there with her. And
Wonderful.
and it made things so much simpler. And she also, when she would get upset, she would then, be like, don't leave me, help me. And I could calm her down with that.
Sure. Yeah.
I wanted to touch upon too, when we were talking about people that are highly capable, little things to notice, like usually when a person with dementia, it's hard for them to be in a crowd of people, even if they're the family that they know. They get very quiet. And
Sure.
to be able, what can you speak to that and say, recognize that and don't punish them, but
Yeah. Everyone, let me say this a different way. Nobody likes to do things they're not good at,
right,
right?
right,
Nobody really signs up for a hobby that they know they have no skills to do, right?
right, right.
And so on the dementia journey, things that once were simple for us, like social gatherings, become far more complicated. And it's simply a fact that people with dementia at a certain point, they can't navigate the complexity in the physical and social world like they could before. And so simplification becomes a very important structural support for people with dementia. And when we align with their capabilities, and sometimes this does mean hard things like not attending a wedding,
Yes,
not having family holidays in the same way that we did before,
yes.
that alignment allows that loved one to still succeed. And that is what honors their dignity and well being.
Yeah, my dad and I, we this was in like the we were outside with my mom, and we had gotten my mom used to love the ice cream cake rolls, and so my dad and I
Yeah,
had brought it. I think it was their anniversary, or maybe it was around my birthday or something like that. And so we were outside with her, and we thought, oh, this will be good, she loves all this, and she got upset with us. And
sure.
later on, I realized, I said to my dad, I go, we if we're together with her, he and I could not talk to each other. I said, I realized that I could talk to my mom directly. My dad could talk to her directly, but my dad and I could not talk to each other when she was there because she couldn't follow it. So
Sure.
whenever, so a lot of times it was just one on one. And anytime, like if her friend or anybody else would come with me, I would tell them that. And then it made for a very pleasant visit with her because I was like, she's getting upset because she can't follow, you know.
Yes, that's exactly right.
And it was something so simple as that, but it was like, okay, let's make this easier for her, and so then a lot of times it was just me or my dad one on one, and then it was okay. But it's all those things, because people are always like, no, we need to do this the same as we always did, but you can't
Sure.
with dementia.
Right. The caregiver has to do all of the adaptation.
Hmm.
And that is hard because it does mean that you have to alter your world and their experiences and your experiences.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the hardest thing as the caregiver, because
Right. Yeah.
it just is. It really is.
Yeah.
I want to talk about your website. It's betterdementia.com.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
what are some of the services? I know you mentioned it before, but if somebody's interested, what can they get from your website?
Yeah. So I have a free training and a newsletter that listeners are welcome to sign up for. Families who are really struggling or who want to get ahead of this journey are welcome to reach out to me. I work with families all over the country, and this allows me to provide the education in my framework, the Better Dementia Journey framework, which is this translation of brain architecture into behavior and then back into the dementia journey. I teach the communication and support strategies that align with each of these domains of cognitive function that will be failing on the journey. So caregivers are well supported from the start of working with me to understand the entire journey, including the end of the journey,
Mm-hmm.
right? The end, and I'm sure you know this from your mother's experience, the end of the dementia journey is marked by various medical considerations or experiences.
Yes.
And as a physician assistant, having a background in palliative and hospice care, I help prepare families for all of these medical potentialities on this journey. And that really helps them feel empowered to make difficult medical decisions for their loved one outside of a crisis. That's the best time to be thinking about your values and wishes for a loved one. So I offer that in private consultation with families, but I also have recently recorded my educational framework as a self-paced course that caregivers
Oh, okay.
are welcome to sign up for. And that is purposely built to fit into busy caregiving schedules. No video lesson is longer than 20 minutes.
Okay.
And it teaches the entire framework, all the stages, the psychiatric symptoms, the medical realities, hospice, how importantly, how to get started with in-home care and how to make a transition to a care facility successfully. Because this is a very important transition point for families. And if you don't do it in a way that aligns with brain function and a person's need to feel competent, capable, and in control, you can very quickly end up the bad guy in your loved one's mind and experience ongoing accusations and other hard conversations. So I teach how to do that effectively.
And I wish I would have had that because,
Yeah.
well, when my mom got diagnosed during COVID, and
Oh
so
gosh.
I did the research on the memory care, and she went into memory care during COVID. In that first night, I can't tell you how many times she called me, and she just was like, "How could you do this to me?" and all of this. It broke my heart. They ended up taking the phone out of her room for a little while, but on the flip side, because it was COVID, we couldn't physically see her for like it was a couple months. We could talk to her then on the phone, and we could do the window and things like that. So in some ways it might have helped her transition with it. And then when we finally got to see her, it was outside visits. And when you were talking about the dogs, I ended up taking care of her dog, and she was so happy that Annie, the dog, remembered her.
Oh,
and that was the only time she remembered that Annie was her dog. But speaking with pets and stuff, Annie, this little terrier, she was so good with my mom because I would bring her periodically to visit her.
Yeah.
And she was so calm, because normally Annie wasn't always calm, but she was so good and so calm with her. So like, that's something too, bring pets for them. And the other thing that always amazed me, my mom couldn't remember 5 minutes what she did before, but she could remember all her old songs that she loved.
Absolutely.
Yep. So music is so important, to play, because like she knew the words to My Girl. She started singing along,
Cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
So those types of things are so important. And the one thing that I did appreciate with my mom in memory care is it was her room. It was all her things.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, with it. Because that's very difficult to navigate as well.
Yeah. I can tell that you were an incredible caregiver for your mom. You really knew her. You really took the time to make her world appropriate for her experiences in life. And you got to know her in a way that really supported what she needed on her journey. And that is amazing. Your mom was so fortunate to have you looking out for her in the way that you were.
Well,
that's
I appreciate that. I appreciate that I feel like I learned that from her because she was a caregiver, and I know that she would have done that for me. But in the back of my mind, I was always like, well, I can't fix her. There's no cure, but at least I could give her some peace, because that's all she wanted. And
absolutely.
I think that if the people, when you're caregiving with dementia, if you could kind of think about that, like you can't. Know.
The way I say it is that the dementia journey will rob your loved one of their skills and abilities, but it will never rob them of their humanity. And the reason that I chose the word better dementia for my business and my book that's coming out next year and my course and everything that I believe about dementia is that when we understand the what, when, and why, we can align and we can master the how of caregiving in a way that supports our loved ones' well-being and dignity, and also supports our own as caregivers. This journey does not have to be all doom and gloom. And if we learn how to navigate it in a way, we all can have a better dementia journey.
I would agree with that 100%. Thank you so much for joining us, Amy. So everyone can check out your book next year, Better Dementia, and your website, betterdementia.com. This was a very, very interesting conversation. I hope the audience got a lot from this, because there's so much more to talk about with dementia. With that,
Lisa, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate the warm conversation.
Oh, thank you so much. So I hope everybody enjoyed this. And so hopefully you enjoyed your cup of tea, your cup of coffee, or if you're having that really bad day, your glass of wine, and you will join us for another edition of Patty's Place.